The first task is to set up the table saw and rip a whole load of 3/4 inch plywood down into the strips that I need. Most of the lower level frames are going to be built out of 3.5 inch wide strips, although the two helixes are 4 inches because of the slightly wider leg spacing. Although I also used 3 inches for legs and 2 inches for secondary bracing. Please ignore the timestamp. This is what came with the camera, and it took me a while to figure out how to fix it. And you can see that I'm not necessarily cutting an entire piece at a time. I'm making sure I get maximum yield out of each piece because I hate wasting materials, especially when this plywood is over $80 a sheet now. Anyway, after ripping up 6 whole sheets of plywood, I think I've got enough of everything. It's time to sweep up the big pile of sawdust that was left in the middle of the floor. Now I'm setting up power cords on the workbench, taking a good look at the plans that I created the previous day, and now it's time to start cutting the pieces for the first couple of frames. It doesn't take very long, and I am mass producing enough pieces for 3 frames in one go, because there's a certain economy of effort in doing more than one at a time. You see me marking them out so I can drill all the wiring holes necessary on the pillar drill. And you may notice that all the short cross braces are processed twice because I wanted one large hole in the middle, and many of them required additional smaller holes on either side. I explain the reason for that in the regular videos. Anyway, it took about twice as long to drill all the holes as it did to cut the parts, because there are a lot of holes. Now I'm cleaning off the workbench and getting set up to build the first frame. And to mark out the side frames is exactly the same procedure as laying out a stud wall during construction. And here I realized the bench wasn't flat, so I had to adjust it with some shims. And now I'm just assembling the first of the frames. It's a basic rectangle. Where possible, I like to start with a simple one just to get into the rhythm. Every piece of wood that goes into my benchwork framing is both glued and screwed for maximum strength joints. And you may notice that I'm using a scrap block of wood as a square just to make sure that everything is vertical. And by the way, that is not my dog. Now this frame has one open end because I have to splice another piece into the end of it afterwards. This section is a 12-foot long L-shaped piece. And although normally benchwork framing is built in smaller sections, the fewer pieces I can build and still get it into the customer's house, the cheaper it's going to be, because I don't have as many joints in the bus wires or the track. Anyway, now I am repeating the previous one. This one is almost a mirror image of the other one, except it's 11 inches shorter. And at this stage, of course, I'm building them in 2 pieces, and I will combine the 2 bits later. I'm sanding the bottoms of all the frames during the construction stage because it's a lot easier than reaching underneath to do it afterwards, and I hate to get splitters in my hands. The top surface is easier to do later after all the sections are bolted together and raised up on legs. Now with the first three pieces assembled, there's two much smaller ones to go in the far corner before the helix. You saw me get the table saw out again because where there is a step in the benchwork frame, I needed two end pieces that were 1.5 inches deeper. With the grade up to that helix, I had the opportunity to get the framings higher off the ground, giving me more comfortable access on the creeper later. So these two small sections didn't take very long at all, and now I'm having a good think before I get on with a rather more complicated bit. This piece that I'm working on now is the one that goes under the taut trestle. And I have to arrange it there so that the scenery can drop right through the staging deck, right down to the ground. So you can see me building complex side frames for this piece. And you may have noticed I had to retrim one piece because I didn't get it quite right the first time. Now I'm building two legs to go on the back corners of this frame. And that temporary horizontal piece on the top just keeps that side straight while I work on the rest of it. Eventually it'll come off after it gets properly braced by the remainder of the frame. So with that frame done, I can start on the two helix sections. And it was about this time that I figured out how to fix the timestamp on the camera. Now, although the two helix frames are pretty much the same, the first one that I did, I hadn't yet worked out the most efficient order to join the pieces together. I struggled a little bit because it's so much wider than the bench. And with my workbench being right up against the wall, obviously I couldn't overhang the back. Hence the temporary legs that I clamped on the front. I'm now putting together two inner frames. And the doubled up front joist is to allow the peninsula to be hung off the front of this frame without risking overstressing it. Anyway, with that helix frame put together, I came up with a much more efficient order of assembly for the other one. It's only a slight change, but it did make a huge difference. And once I get halfway through, the rest of the process is exactly the same, except that I don't have the doubler on the front. Now with all the frames assembled, I'm moving them to the correct locations in the room. And the next step is to build a whole load of legs. From memory, I think I needed 28 of them. Now, I didn't have enough 3-inch sticks of wood, so I cut up some offcuts to make some more. And now after cutting all the parts, I'm assembling all the legs in batches of 4 for no better reason than it just seems like a convenient number to work on at one time. All my benchwork legs are built by laminating 2 3-inch wide strips of plywood, one of them longer than the other. That way the frame can rest firmly on the shorter piece and screw to the longer one. Now I'm just sanding all the edges. I had a bit of a false start here. I started to add the first 2 legs to one of the frames, and then I realized I hadn't put the T-nuts and adjustment screws in the bottoms. So now I'm doing that. And the ladder is there because hammering the T-nut in, I found that the second rung of the ladder was the right height to be able to do it conveniently. And of course, unfortunately, I forgot to put the ladder away afterwards, so now it's in the way of what I'm doing. I think it's safe to say that I'm better at building benchwork than I am at making videos. Now I'm systematically working my way around the room, adding the legs to all the benchwork sections. And I like to aim for gaps of about 4 feet between legs. I don't like spanning any further than that unless I can help it. I mentioned earlier that the helix frames are 4 inches deep instead of 3.5. That's because those legs are around 5 feet apart. Anyway, I started joining the frames together. I did the first 2 nearest the camera, and then I decided to go around and start from the other end. I can't remember why, but I know there was a reason for it. And I had to quickly switch out some of the longer bolts that I put in the far corner because I realized I didn't need enough of them for the middle. And now I'm working my way around, getting all the frames bolted together. They're nothing like level at this point. And now what I'm doing is starting at one end and working my way around the room, getting everything level. The corner nearest the camera is the highest part of the workshop floor, so the bolt was screwed all the way in that corner. And by the time I got to the far corner where I'm working now, I needed about 6 inches of packing. I'm using all the offcuts from when I built the beams. You'll notice I'm chopping up short lengths of 2x12s. So now that I've reached all the way to the end, I'm going back and checking everything. And now you see me with the tape measure. I'm using a 3-4-5 right angle triangle to make sure I have everything exactly square. And once I'm happy with the squareness of it, I'm attaching it to the walls of the workshop so that it doesn't move. I attached it to the walls in 4 places and also to the support posts in 4 other places. It is necessary to have strips of plywood across the floor, but I put those on the flat so they're not a tripping hazard. It's just a pain to sweep up around them, that's all. And now I'm just going around sanding all the top edges of the benchwork frames with the orbital sander, and we can call that step done. Although before I got on with the next one, I did put a tape on it once more, just to check all the dimensions. And I did find that one of the frames had moved about 1/8 of an inch out of alignment as I was putting the brace on one of the posts, so I adjusted that.